under what circumstances, as Prime Minister, do you think it would be justifiable to deploy Canadian Armed Forces in a combat role?
Oh, I think it's warranted if there's a reasonable chance of success, if there's a way that Canada can offer expertise that the rest of the world is unable to provide.
So just to clarify, are you saying there's no chance of success with the fight against ISIS?
Oh, I'm saying that this is going to be a very long challenge against ISIS, and Canada's role in engaging with that needs to be best suited to what we can do better than other countries.
Well, that took place on a radio interview in London, Ontario. Andrew Lawton is the radio host. He joins us now. Andrew, welcome.
It's good to be back, Jerry. Thank you.
Good to have you. And Marissa Semkiw is with me. Andrew, after those answers to the questions you asked, I'm sure you're very clear now on what his position is. Can you explain it to us?
I'm not even sure if he could explain it to you, because what you didn't play there was a couple of more attempts on my part to try to get him to answer what I thought was a very simple question, which is, okay, look, you clearly aren't okay with the ISIS invasion from a combat perspective. What would you be okay with? What would, in your eyes, justify a Canadian combat intervention by the military? And he had no answer for that. In fact, the last question of the interview, I said, look, I've asked you 3 times. You haven't told me what would justify it. Give me a scenario. And his exact words were, it's not a scenario I can give.
Andrew, you asked him, as you say, 3 times the same exact question. I don't even think the wording was a little bit different. My question to you is, do you get the sense that that is what he truly believes? His initial response was, I would deploy forces if in fact it was a winnable war. Do you get the sense that that's actually what he truly believes, that Iraq is not a winnable war, or he's just sort of not really sure how to answer a question like this?
Well, I think it's a bit of A and a bit of B there in terms of that, Marissa, because there is, even if you believe that it's a mission that is not going to succeed, there are options you can use when you're answering a question. I mean, anyone who works in media, we have to think on our feet in many cases, and he could have said, look, I feel that there's no end game. He said, I feel there's no exit strategy. He could have said anything if it was just simply a matter of not believing it. So I think there is a general sense of not necessarily knowing how to answer a question there, but I also think he's genuinely in way over his head when it comes to anything to do with foreign policy. So I don't think it's that he has a resolute belief that this wouldn't succeed. I think it's that he just doesn't know how to approach matters pertaining to foreign policy and national security.
Well, it's easy to keep asking questions, and as I was thinking of them, do you think that Justin Trudeau thinks this or that? He's not a thinker, Andrew.
It certainly looks that way. He is a talker, but it's amazing, and I give him credit for this, how much he can say in words without saying anything in substance. I was actually in awe of that myself when I interviewed him yesterday.
So do you think that he just feels it is his position to oppose the Prime Minister, and that's good enough, and we'll get policy once we trust him and elect him Prime Minister?
You know, it certainly looks that way, and I've always believed that foreign policy, when you're looking at military intervention, should be a relatively unifying thing. When it comes down to it, everyone should be able to get behind what's in the interest of Canada when we're looking at representing our country abroad and in conflicts like perhaps the one against ISIS. But in a couple of the attempts for me to ask Mr. Trudeau what he thinks, he would bring it back to what Stephen Harper had done. And I think there's a time and a place for criticizing the government, criticizing the Prime Minister, even this Prime Minister, but he wasn't able to answer his own position without talking about what Mr. Harper did against ISIS that Trudeau didn't like.
You know, I think it's what's been clear in all of this is Trudeau hasn't really had a very clear position when it comes to this. Okay, he didn't support the mission, then he says he kind of supports the troops' ability to defend themselves against ISIS. Now he is, you know, mincing words or splitting hairs, so to speak, over, you know, the parameters surrounding Stephen Harper's initial decision to send the CF-18s over to Iraq. And of course, we all have to remember when all of this started happening, there were senior elite members of his own party that were disagreeing with him. So I think he's in a bit of a precarious situation, because I think, going back to what Andrew Lawton said, is it's just not really clear if he knows exactly what it is he's talking about.
Well, and this is the big problem I have, Marissa, is that he should be able to say, look, I think we should only intervene in a combat role in a case of X, Y, Z. Maybe you think only when there's a domestic security threat. Maybe you think only when there are Canadian interests at stake. Whatever the case may be, you have to, if you're going to lead a government, lead a country, be able to define when the point is at which combat may be necessary. And okay, you may think, as Trudeau does, that it's not necessary in the fight against ISIS. I disagree with that. But at least say then, what would your criteria be? Give a scenario that you would think warrants combat intervention. And that's what we didn't hear from him. And it's terrifying to me that he may actually genuinely not know.
Andrew, going into the election, do you get the sense that this will affect him, that will impact him in a, be it either positive or perhaps negative way?
I think it depends on the news of the day. I mean, we've seen in polls in the last few months, whenever there's a terror threat or a security threat, whether in Canada or abroad, the Prime Minister benefits. I think Canadians generally feel safer under Prime Minister Harper. Now, if there is nothing that happens between now and October, if the election's then or whenever it may fall, I think we can all be grateful that there has been no massive security threat or challenge. But if Canadians feel safer naturally, then I think that may benefit Trudeau. Whereas if they feel that they need to have sort of this protector role, I think that's when naturally you'd see him suffer a little bit, especially if clips of my interview with him and other things he said on the matter, like, for example, the famous clip of him in Alberta a few weeks ago talking about, offering cold weather advice to people in northern Iraq. I think these things genuinely give a sense of unease about it. I mean, even Liberal operative Warren Kinsella wrote about it this morning on his blog, that this is just not something that should be comforting to any Canadian.
Well, I wonder if there's not only a lack of comfort, maybe some discouragement to our troops who are in harm's way. If his position is we would only go into combat if there's a reasonable chance of success, then if he thinks that's not the case and he's so critical of what we're doing in Iraq, perhaps he does, then maybe he should be imploring the Prime Minister to bring the troops home.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where once he said that line about success, I wish I would have had a whole, hour with him just to talk even about his one response to that question. I mean, was success guaranteed when Allied forces went into World War II? Was success guaranteed when, British went into World War I? Was success guaranteed in the Afghanistan war and any other global conflict? It never is. What you have to do as a leader of government is offer training and support and resources to give the best chance of success to the military. So I think it was certainly in many ways a concerning statement for him to say. If I were a serviceman or servicewoman in Iraq or in Afghanistan, whatever the case may be, and I heard that someone who wants to be Prime Minister doesn't think that it's a chance of success that we have, that would be a pretty staggeringly unfortunate reality to hear.
Good job on the interview, Andrew, and thanks for this.
Nicely
Thank
done.
you, Jerry.
Good.